to walk away with. And I think that's okay to start off. We don't have to think necessarily about looking at our grading or looking at all of that stuff, right away. This is definitely a journey, and it's okay to take baby steps as part of that journey. I know when Jen reached out to me about doing this and doing this session, I was definitely adamant about we need to make sure that this is a conversation and that we are not coming across as experts, because I definitely don't feel like I'm an expert in standards-based grading. I am still babyish level, I feel when it comes to this, but really important that we're having these conversations and that we're just starting to kind of think about and to process and to talk about our grading practices, because we do want to start having those conversations about our grade book and what those look like. All right, so on that note, with some intentions for today, we do encourage you guys to be open-minded. These might be some difficult reflections and difficult conversations, or some new ideas might be putting out there. So be open-minded about it. And then try new ideas and then take them off if they don't fit. You can kind of pick and choose what you want right now or what fits your class right now. We don't want to overwhelm you or to think that this is the end all be all of how you should do standards-based grading. You kind of are picking your journey right now and what works for you and what doesn't work for you. The bottom line, this has to work for you and your classroom. And if it doesn't work, then don't do it. Take it off as you need to. And then also, we encourage you guys to use your advisory gradebook as kind of your experimental for today, if you want to kind of play with it. If you feel comfortable enough to start looking at Monday's classes and start setting it up that way too, that's fine. If you're not quite comfortable, then use your advisory gradebook, because their grades, they're not getting graded on, at least, they're not as high stakes grades as the other ones are, or any grades, that fact.
I would just like to add, experiment with your advisory gradebook this whole semester, because who knows if we're going to have advisory in the future. So we've got this total mock demo fake gradebook that we can turn on standards modes and make a mess, and doesn't matter. So we've got a total practice gradebook, which just makes this the perfect time to play around. So I wanted to share I interviewed a handful of teachers who had various levels of expertise in standards-based grading. And one of my favorite interviews was with Jason Chamberlain. He's at Alice L High School. And what he said to me, this just really struck. He said, standards-based grading is a series of choices that you make based on what you deem best practices. So there's not, if you're looking for to show me how to do it, I can't. Because there's all of these points where you need to make a choice. Do you want to use the 4-point scale or the 5-point scale? Do you want a 0 to be 0, or do you want a 0 to be 50, or maybe you want it to be 59? You have to make a series of choices. We can walk you through where the choices. Do you use weighting or not weighting? So there's all of these choices, and there's research around ways to make those choices, but you're still ultimately in the driver's seat of what's comfortable and makes sense for you. The big thing is grading should be it should make sense to you clear as day, and it should make sense to your students clear as day. So you're still the driver of that. So I love that it's just a series of choices. Amber and my gradebooks don't look the same. The people that I have conversations with, our gradebooks don't look the same. They have some similarities using the 4-point scale, but even what that 4-point scale mathematically calculates out to is different between myself and some of my friends. So you're still the driver of your gradebook. All right. We didn't put a Bitmoji. Oh, is there a Bitmoji here? I will say, I'm just going to roll through. Our presentation today is pulled from this book, Grading for Equity. Amber and I are in a book club, and we have met twice, and this is the book that we're reading. And early on in the book, Joe Feldman, he says, look, there's really 5 things. And here's the 5 things. Number 1, let's go back and forth. Number 1, let me pause and say, each of these 5 things is the rest of this presentation. We're going to pause on number 1 and chat with you about number 1. We're going to pause on number 2, chat with you about number 2, et cetera, et cetera. So number 1, how to set it up so it mathematically is clear, equitable, and works. I want to do number 2.
Yeah, so for number 2, we really are looking at practices that value knowledge and not the environment or behavior. So really looking at what the skills that students are learning versus all the other factors that go into it as well.
And 3 is supporting that growth mindset. And we talked about this in the SLAM, just revisions and second chances and try agains and growing instead of being perfect on your first try.
And then number 4 is practices that lift the veil on how to succeed. So grading and our grading practices shouldn't be this mystery for students. It should be really consistent. And that's some of the feedback that I've gotten from my students as well, is just that they really appreciate the consistency in the grading, because they don't, every assignment is consistent. Instead of, is this assignment 10 points? Is this 15 points? Is this 20 points? They know how they're going to be assessed for each assignment.
And then I talked about this in the other piece, but motivating without it being like cashing in. Here's my assignment. Where's my points? Here's my assignment, and let me show everybody, because I'm so inspired, what I can now do. Let me show folks my skills and how I know this thing, and having that be the reward, not a point payout. So we're going to deep dive into each of these things, and we will invite you to unmute and throw stuff in the chat and engage with us. I do want to say we anticipate the first one to be the stickiest, and we're okay if we get stuck there, because a lot of like 2, 3, and 4 is a lot of like, yes, yes, of course. And then 1 is where everybody's like, what? So let's go ahead and start there.
All right, so looking at our first one is the practices that are mathematically sound. So we really just want to make sure that consistency is, I think, is my word of the day. It's just making sure that everything is consistent and that it makes sense. So 1, we want to use algorithms that allow and to support growth. So thinking about in our gradebook, like maybe we want to switch over to like the standards-based mode, or we're looking at ways that we can really kind of support that growth within students. 2, allowing multiple attempts at a skill. As an English teacher, one of the key things that I wanted my students to know is that, like, when they're writing essays, that writing is kind of a circular process, that it's all about the revisions and going back to it. And I realized that the way I was teaching it was not allowing that multiple attempts, or not allowing that revision process. So really allowing that revision process to happen, or showcasing those skills, depending on what your skill or your standard is. What are the multiple ways that they can access that skill or demonstrate that skill to you? So maybe instead of having like maybe one assignment be the end all be all to demonstrate that skill, maybe there's multiple ways that we can kind of showcase that skill with the student. The third one is to use a 4-point scale instead of a 0 to 100-point scale. So in my gradebook, we have a 4-point scale set up with Synergy, and the next slide we'll go over that. But one reason I really, really like this, now, as Jen said, this process looks different for everybody. So I know teachers whose 4-point scale, like they have it down to the 4.2 or 4.1 or 4.0, whatever it is. So looking at that with it, and looking at the reason, so it can look different still for everybody if you're using the 0 to 4 point. I personally just use 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the reason why is it's just a lot simpler. It's a lot less brain power that I'm thinking. So I know a lot of times, like when I was grading and like kind of adding up the math, or like looking at essays and kind of looking at the subjectivity that I used to do with grading, it's like, okay, so is this like a 95 or is this a 90? Or how does that what is the difference between each one of these points? Having the 0 to 4-point scale really kind of simplifies it for me. It simplifies it for the students as well. And then this one is a tricky one, and I can already see it happening in the chat, which I love, is the don't give zeros. Now, I'm not quite there yet. I'll totally admit that. But I think the point, what Joe Feldman is getting at is that zeros can be really discouraging for students, and especially for students that have consistently failed or have consistently not done work. And we know that zeros, in the 0 to 100 point scale and grading system, that zeros can have a huge impact on students and can be a huge hole that they can't dig themselves out of, or it takes them a long time to dig out of. So this one is usually the stickiest point. And like I said, I'm not quite there yet, mostly because our synergy, if you I put in that missing equals a 0. But the biggest thing that I took away from this point and the conversation that I had with Jen about this is that zeros, like, what are you trying to communicate with zeros? Are you trying to communicate that it's missing work and that the student needs to turn in that work? So maybe there's different ways that we can communicate with the student that they need to work, that you want that work from them. So maybe that's an email first, or maybe that's, a direct contact or a chat with the student about their zero first. So think about why we're giving those zeros and what we're getting out of it. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me is just, if we're using zeros as a communication tool, that we don't have it, what are the other ways we can communicate with that student before we put in that zero to get that work? Now, like I said, that's the one I probably am not the greatest at. I still have zeros. I put in that missing work all the time, and that translates to zeros in Synergy too. But it's just a good, like I said, a conversation starter with it. All right. So Jen, if you would like to add, or we can open it up to.
Yeah, I want to jump in. I have a lot of thoughts. Hold on. My first thought, I'm gonna go backwards up this list. So on the zeros, I just put on my syllabus, this just got written on my syllabus like 1 or 2 days ago. I have what is a 4 equal, a 3, a 2, a 1. And then when I put 0, I put next to that, I will email you, Google Hangout you, text you, call your mom, call your dad, call your brother, call your aunt before I put a 0 in my gradebook. Because this is the thing. If it's missing, there's a reason it's missing. And that reason isn't that they don't have the skill. And if we put a 0, that means mathematically we've decided they don't have the skill because we're measuring the skill. But it's a behavior. The reason it's missing is a behavior. And that behavior could be procrastination. That behavior could be not understanding and didn't ask you. But I think a lot of times we go, okay, well, the 0 will motivate them. This is me communicating that. So they know to do their 0. They know to do their zeros, right? So 0 means they need to do it. It's like to-do item. Well, if it's to-do item, tell them, hey, there's this to-do item that you still have. And that is extra, but I think it's what we meant with the 0, like Amber was saying, as communication. And so instead of thinking of the gradebook as communication, it's a measuring of a skill. If you mean to communicate, communicate. So I know that's like, here's the thing with that. When you do that on the first day, it kind of tapers. If you don't do it until the 100th day, yes, that's too many people to talk to. That's going to be a hot mess. But if you do it right away on the first day, it sets the precedent that, oh my God, if I don't do it, she's going to call my mom, she's going to da-da-da-da-da. And it's just, if you do it early, it really actually is less work. So and we can come back and circle back and talk about zeros like a ton. But basically, if you put a 0, we're English teachers, so the first essay, you got a B. The next essay you didn't do. So what's your essay? Or let's say because I can't do math that good. So let's say the first one you got an A. And then the next one you didn't do. So what's your essay skill? Is it C? Well, no, that's your behavior of turning in essays. Like, you obviously, could do it that first time. So we're looking at stopping grading behavior and focusing more on grading the content and the skill. So I want to.
Oh, I just want to jump in there too. And if you're contacting so many students about stuff, that also has to go with our later points too that we're going to be making of not everything has to be graded, not everything is assessed. What is a test versus what is an assessment? And so, kind of really narrowing that down and really taking reflection of what we're assigning and how we're assigning things.
Oh man, I got a little thing. So another thing, comes later, but yeah, I'm only going to put in my gradebook major projects, major paper, and their portfolio I'm not going to put practice, or there's not really homework, but I'm not going to put practice. So I'm not calling for every little thing. Oh, you haven't started the big thing. Yeah, like I would have called for that anyway. Okay, I want to back it up, and I want to tell you a little bit about my journey with number 3. 6 years ago, the very first step, the thing that my friends and fiance told me at the conference was their gradebook didn't go below 50%. And I was like, I don't understand. I trust both of you dearly. What the heck? Everybody's gradebook is 0 to 100. Why is yours different? Like, explain it to me. Explain it to me. And it started with hearing this from people I loved to be like, you are so crazy. Explain it again. Explain it again. It took me a long time before I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to my gradebook, and anything that is an F, I'm going to put in 50%, and I'm just going to see what happens. Anything that's a 0, I'm going to put 50%. I'm just going to see what happens. And here's what happened. Nothing changed at all, except for like 2 kids who went from a 20% to a 60%. That same kid ended up, when she had a 60%, I kept my gradebook like that. She very easily moved to a C, and then to a B, and then took honors in the class and AP for the next 2 years. So and she was able to play her sport, which she wasn't going to be able to play when I had my gradebook go to 0 from 100. That was the only kid affected, because everybody else didn't have zeros. I just had this one kid with a ton of zeros. And when I moved it to 50%, suddenly it was accessible for her to be successful in our class. And so she was. So for me, it took trying it on in my own gradebook and having my own personal, like, oh my gosh, to be like, oh yeah, I'm never looking back. Now, I mentor some younger teachers, and they came out of their teacher programs with this, like, we use a 4-point scale. I'm like, say what? Now, what do you want to do? You want to do what? And since I'm EdTech, when somebody wants to do something, I have to figure out how they're going to set it up. So I actually came to the 4-point scale because I was mentoring somebody whose teacher program was like, oh yes, the 4-point scale. So after I set it up for her, I called some of my friends and was like, hey, 4-point, what do you know about 4-point scale? And they're like, yes, we use the 4. So I was like, okay, I'll try it on. So for me, where I am is I just did last semester with the 4-point scale, loved it, because for me, 4 was like, yes, and 3 was like, almost, and 2 was like, 1, you started, and I set my 0 at 50%. So that's how I was able to move away from the 0 to 100 scale. I set my 0 to 50. I forget what my 1 is, but it's in a video that you can see. Like 1 is a D, and 2 is a C, and 3 is a B, and 4 is an A. And there's multiple ways you can set that up, and we can show you that. My students, I never even explain the 4-point scale. Every time I assign something, I'm like, here's how you get a 4. This is a 3. It could be a 4. I never even was like, they never questioned it at all. They just rolled with it. You could get 1, 2, 3, or 4. So every single assignment, you could get 1, 2, 3, or 4. And also, if it wasn't a 4, keep doing it till it's a 4. Keep doing it till it's a 4. So that's where I am. I have areas I want to switch. I want to evolve. I want to do some other things, but that's kind of where I am with this. I do want to just kind of blabble one more thing about number 1. Jason Chamberlain talked to me about this idea of power law. Now, Amber and I do not have standards-based mode turned on in our gradebook. We do not. We are using a traditional gradebook to grade using some of these equitable strategies, but we have not yet turned on standards-based mode. I think we want to. I'm a little scared. I tell myself maybe I'll do it on Monday, but maybe I won't, and I'll kind of make a fake one in advisory. But anyways, if you turn on standards-based grade, the way that it would be organized is you would have the category is the standard. You have the assignments that align with that standard, and now you get to choose. Does the grade come from an average, like a mathematical equal average? Does the grade come from the most recent assignment in that standard? or something called power law. And I was telling this to a speech therapist, and she's like, oh yeah, this is how we like diagnose things. And power law means 80% of the score comes from the most recent attempt, 20% comes from an average. So today, with our mathematically superior grading abilities, we actually can do we can set up things like power law in the standards-based grading gradebook. And so these, again, not doing that, but curious about it, right? Okay, that's the things I wanted to make sure I said. Now, if you folks, go ahead, Amber.
Oh, I was going to say, I was going to address the chat real quick. So yes, I do see better grades, but I think it has to do more with that student engagement with that piece, because my students, like, they don't get extra credit opportunities. They have to do the work that they're assigned. And I think too, and I noticed this semester, I switched over to Avid this year. And so I'm still trying to figure out how to fit the process that I did with English and fit it into the Avid classroom. But one thing I noticed is, like, the kids that have like consistently missing work, they feel like they can't dig themselves out of the hole. So why should they even bother trying? And what this does is that gives them that line and gives them that anchor a little bit. So that's, it's just something to kind of think about there. All right, now we can open up the chat. So if you guys want to chat, keep the chat going, or if you want to unmute and chat, either share your thoughts, your feelings, or any questions that you guys have about this one, and then we'll move on.
I answered the first one in the chat. I'll voice it. I don't mean to, I feel like this sounds very braggy. Of my students who showed up every day, first of all, I'm an EdTech, so I do not have as many students as a teacher with a full set of classes. But of the students I had no people who came every day with D's or F's in a junior English class. The people who had D's were able to turn them into C's. It was always mathematically possible to not. This is the thing about this grading scale. It is always mathematically possible to pass the class or to get any grade that you desire. In a 0 to 100 grade scale, you've probably heard this before. Student does assignment number 1, gets an A. They don't do assignment number 2, get a 0, and they can never have an A again, because the math will never allow them to climb out of a hole with that big of a disparity.
I see in the chat from Crystal about using the 10-point scale for larger assignments and 5 points for smaller ones. Again, this is your kind of choose your own adventure, like pick and choose what works for you. So that can definitely work for you as long as it's like consistent. Your students know what to expect for each of those. With the 4-point scale, I really took a look at what I'm assigning as an assessment and what I'm assigning as practice. So not all the work that my students do, we might get feedback on it, but doesn't necessarily go in the grade book. And we'll talk about that in a couple of the more steps, but thinking about like what is really practice versus what am I assessing is how I kind of maneuver the 4-point scale with that. And then I recommend implement. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was gonna say the 0 thing is really weird because, yeah, right. Like if they don't do it, that doesn't mean that they get a free pass. It means that you don't have complete information and actually they get an incomplete. The idea of just not dropping in 0s without communicating is you think you're communicating, they think they're failing. So I have 0s in my grade book. However, a 0 is gonna come along with a ton of nagging. Like a ton of, it's going to be more uncomfortable to do a 0 than to get any other score, because I'm going to be so annoying to you and your whole family. So although Joe Feldman what Joe Feldman would say is don't put a 0 and then ultimately give them an incomplete. And you know that an incomplete turns into an F and it's the same thing. So the idea is just don't consider the 0 a communication.
I will have to say, don't give incompletes as a progress report grade or whatnot without talking to the counselors, because I did that once. It wasn't a quarter grade, it was just a progress report grade, and came to a house meeting, and my counselor was really frustrated with me because she was like, but they're all going to turn, like, because I didn't talk to her first. So definitely talk to your counselors, or if you're in those small PLCs or whatever, communicate that before you start doing it, because it can cause some extra headaches on the office side. So just communicate that with that. And then Michelle's question, quick. Okay.
Oh, I just wanted to add to that. My admin did not like that so I had two kids not really show up. So I gave them incompletes instead of Fs. And my admin called me and was like, but it's an F. And I'm like, well, but they didn't show me that. And they're like, no, but it's an F. So something about that, according to Joe Feldman's book, you're supposed to give an incomplete. According to my admin, you're supposed to give an F. So there's going to be these moments where you're like, but, and then there's your choice. You got to choose. Go ahead, Amber.
So I was just going to look at Michelle's question, and I think we need to move on because we're taking too much time on this first part, which is good. But recommend implementing zeros for this, or no zeros for this upcoming semester. I would say go for it. If you're comfortable with moving that direction, I would say go for it. One thing that Joe Feldman and a couple of the other standards-based readings that I've done, it talks a lot about guilt when you like thinking about your practices and thinking about things that I've done. I think about like the practices I was doing my first, or like, my early years of teaching, and think about like, oh man, I really should have done better. Like, or think about like that one student that I was like, man, I was probably a little too hard on them. I probably could have like helped them out a little bit more. So wherever you make that change, I think is important. We are starting fresh with a whole new classes this semester. So I would say go for it. And then as Ryoji pointed out too, is that you can't always do grade replacements. So one thing, especially when I first started kind of implementing the standards-based grading, I actually started at the semester level. So in January, I kind of started changing up my grade book. And I personally allowed for, if a kid came to me and said, like, hey, I'm really, like I got a D or an F the first semester, I'm willing to work. I kind of worked with that student. So it's kind of just based all on that. But for the sake of time, questions are awesome, so keep them coming. But for the sake of time, let's go ahead and go to number 2, or I'm afraid we're gonna just spend all day talking about number 1.
I do, and we can go back to number 1 because I think number 1's the sticky one. All the rest are like, yes. So I mean, yes, we'll go on to them, but we can always circle back because number 1's the one where people get like, but how? So what I have a video,
especially the zeros is definitely the sticky point.
This is a video of how I know it says 5-point scale because this is Hardin Middle School science team uses a 5-point scale, but it goes out to the 10th place. So they can do 5, 4.9, 4.8. So that's in here. And we have a resource bundle Padlet that we'll share with you that has Hardin's grade scale. They've been doing this together as a PLC for many, many years. But this video is how to go into Synergy and set up 4-point scale. I do want to say, and this is where this was really weird for me, once you set it up on a 4-point scale, that means everything you grade is a 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's kind of like a little switch. It's not like, oh, things are 10 points and then sometimes things are 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like once you're, I don't know, I moved completely to a 4-point scale. So everything in my grade book is a 1, 2, 3, or 4. And you'll see that if and when you watch this video. And in our sandbox, we can go through setting this up and do this setup with y'all. That can be kind of like your product. Okay, moving on. So number 2, let's see. The reason for not doing the zeros, and we've kind of said this, is you want your grades to reflect skills and knowledge and not behavior. So you want your grade to reflect their ability to really know something, not the behavior if they completed or what their procrastination issue was. We've also talked about multiple sources. So it's not like, okay, well, one time you did it, so this is your score. Because I know there's some racers in the room and you don't get how fast you run. If I asked a racer how fast they ran, they would tell me their most recent run. Not like, oh, well, if you take every run I've ever done and averaged it, here's how it is. And it's just based on multiple sources. So here's another one. Homework, classwork, practice stuff. I really actually think I've kind of developed some kind of complex from traditional grading because, and I'm definitely giving one to my own kid, because if everything has to be perfect every time you attempt it in order to get an A or a 4.0, then you're kind of get this perfectionism conflict where you're not allowed to make a mistake and learn from it because that's wrong. Because then you're not going to get the 4.0. Then you can't go to Cal Poly. Then this and this and this and this and the scholarship and the whole thing. So if something's really meant to be practice and you want to lower the stakes and lower that stress level and lower that ZPD and just, hey, let's just see how your paragraph looks on a first attempt, then don't put so much gradebook pressure on that, on the practice. So this says don't grade homework, but don't think of it as homework. Think about it as while the learning is happening, just give feedback, or according to Feldman, just give feedback. Give lots of different, hey, some kids need to do something 3 times. Some kids need to do it 1 time. Who cares how many times they need to do it? Because you're grading more like the summative. And we talked about behavior a lot. And then here's the other one. And this is another one that people don't like. And I'm definitely have given extra credit for things all the time. Extra credit, it's not skills-based, it's behaviors-based. So you can still give extra opportunities, but when you put points, then it kind of you've deflated your own grading economy, if that makes sense. So this is the kind of chapter 2 piece. If you have any questions, comments, oh, Amber, I'll shoot it over to you.
I'm just looking at the chat and stuff and looking at unprepared students, and that is huge, like unprepared students moving up. And I think one of the things that was the biggest aha for me moving into standards based was really reflecting on what I was assigning and what I was giving points for, because I want to grade their skills and I want to know where a student is at with their skills and their growth in my class. And how does giving extra credit for tissue boxes assess their skills or let me know their skill level, or giving like I used to have them, like when they would go to performances and stuff, like give that extra credit for it. Those are all great things, but that doesn't tell me where they are in reading and writing and listening and speaking with that. So really, I think one of the biggest aha for me is with like not grading homework or not grading behavior or not having those extra credits is that I was really focusing on the skills that they could do. So really narrowing in on those focus standards that we needed for English and really looking at what do I want my students to walk away. And as a PLC, we looked at what do we want our students to walk away from this year or this semester knowing, and how do we know that they know it? And so really looking at what we're doing and evaluating what we're doing.
And then I don't mean to go back to talk about the math again, but another argument for, I know we're talking a little bit about the 50%. The difference between a B and an A is on a 1 to 100 point scale is 10%. A B to a C, 10%. C to a D, 10%, and then an F gets like 60% of the scale. So it was never set up to be mathematically sound. If you really want to look at the A, B, C, and D and have them kind of average more holistically, it would be cut off at the 50%. And I need to not debate this because I've gotten like about about like the 50% versus the 0. And that's why I like coming back to it's a choice. I made this one, you make yours. But if you read the research and you read these books again and again, it will say capping it at 50 is mathematically logic-sensical. Is that the word? How do you say that word? Logic-sensical?
Yeah, so that's what that works. To go to Barry's comment in the chat about if not grading homework or classwork, no points and what's the incentive? And I think, so there's a couple ways to set it up. One, you can set it up as kind of like you need to do this or kind of show this practice and in order to get to the next step. So that's kind of one way to set it up. The other way that I kind of had to let go of is if my students can succeed without doing the practice, do they really need to do the practice? Like if my students can write the essay or write the paragraph and get the points for it, or like, and show me that they know how to do it. Does it really matter that they know how to do, or like, does it really matter that they watched the Edpuzzle video on it or not, or whatever I wanted them to do? So I think that's also the choices that I've had to make as an educator, is like to try to see that. And that's part of my retake process too, that if the kid didn't do well on the whatever assessment I had, whether it was project-based or a test, they didn't do well on that, then I had them go back and do all the practice assignments that they did, and to relook at those practice assignments. So I think that's kind of where it kind of goes at. This is also a little bit more of scaffolding their learning into that individual learning. And I mean, I think we've all been in places where we needed to do the practice at all. And Crystal, we're getting into bigger questions too, of like getting into the class and getting into like, do they need to do this class, or can they just sit out of the class? Those are also like, obviously we're working within the confines of our system too, that we need to keep in mind. But that's kind of the biggest thing that I've also had to kind of let go too, is, you know, what really matters for my students, that they're doing the things that I like, that they're complying with the things that I'm asking them to do, or that they know the skill set. And that's kind of like the choices and the decisions around what I've had to do in my teaching as well. And again, this is a journey. Like I don't think I'm perfect at that yet. And I don't think there's definitely, especially this year since I switched to Avid, and I'm still kind of figuring out Avid and how to do standards-based grading with Avid, of like what is really like, you know, this year I was not perfect at that at all, like at all. But I think those are just the choices and the conversations. And that's one of the things that I've really felt like standards-based grading has made me a better teacher, because I've been thinking about and reflecting on those choices.
I want to jump in, and someone was asking about the motivation. You can always set it up where you have to do the practice to take the test. Like, I want to see this amount of practices, and then you can take the retake. Or in order to access the retake, you need to do more practice. Choose from this list of practices. And math people, I totally get you, because your subject needs mastery of the prior subject in order to move forward. But I will tell you, when a student sees that it's possible to succeed, when it's mathematically possible to succeed, then they can succeed and they'll try. When they know that it's mathematically like they're screwed, they kind of are like, okay, well, I'm done playing the game. It's rigged, right? It's not set up. It's not mathematically possible for me to be successful, therefore I'm done. So when this whole stuff comes out of a book on, not on standards-based grading, on equity. So making that scale where every single day they show up, it's possible for them to have whatever grade they, identify. Students identify their whole value in your subject based on their grade. I'm an F. I even remember to this day, I got a C in math one time. Like, oh, I'm this kind of math person. So their entire identity gets warped up in their grade. And you're basically by leveling out the playing field, you're unstucking this perception on themselves that they can or can't do and you all know you have growth mindset that they can, but it gives them that growth mindset. Okay, I'm moving on. Or are there questions, Amber? Tell me.
There are questions. I was going to answer some in the chat too, but talking about, yes. So like one, Liz pointed out that you can, I totally lost the point there, but that if you're allowing them those retakes, I think it is definitely mathematically possible. I think it has to go with more of like the student motivation and seeing them. I know like this last semester, students that just kept seeing zeros, I lost them. And as much as I tried to pull them in and tried to tell them that they could do retakes and told them to go to intervention support, which we have at LSL, it was really hard to get those students because they just kept seeing that. So I think, and I think a lot of that too goes with like the relationship you have in the classroom and how your class is set up as well. So it goes with that as well. And I think, is Jennifer, did you have something to add?
Yeah, hi, Amber.
Yeah.
Did you see me unmute? I'm Jennifer Fano. I'm an ed specialist at Salinas High School. And I just wanted to add to the conversation because I worked with a student this semester who was failing at progress report time. And I worked with her one-on-one every single day. And we turned in everything and she still got a 52% and failed. And so even as an adult, I wanted to give up. I shouldn't have worked and did all that with her. And I feel like this is a conversation that really needs to happen, because she did do a lot of work, but it didn't meet the criteria for that teacher's grade book.
Yeah, and I think, and then that's the challenge, and like I think too, there's a lot of questions that are happening in chat, and I think it's just the conversations, just starting to have those conversations. And like I said, the biggest thing for me was looking at what my practices were, why I was assigning something, and then how we can motivate students more in doing that. All right, I know we're over time. Do we want to continue?
Break. I don't mean to be like dictator, but I think we like roll through. You can step in and out as you please, because it's being recorded, and that gives us, like, you can take your break at the end, so that we can. Is that cool? Are people cool with that? Okay. Because yeah, is that okay, Amber?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
go ahead.
So okay, and I'm just like looking at the chat. So let's go ahead and move on, because there's lots of questions that are coming, and we knew there's lots of questions. There's always lots of questions with standards-based grading, and again, we want to kind of continue this conversation. So let's go ahead and go on. All right, so practices. We also want to look at practices that support and hope and a growth mindset, if I can talk here. And this is basically what we've been talking about in the conversations that I've been seeing in the chat. So we want to encourage mistakes. Again, we don't want everything that they turn in. Like, we want to encourage practice. We need to practice. We need to learn something. We kind of need to have those mistakes in order to grow from them. So to encourage those mistakes, to allow test retakes and essay revisions and project revisions, and looking at that. And then also looking at how we can replace previous scores. So once students show their learning, can we replace those scores with current scores instead of just averaging? And again, that kind of goes into how our gradebook is set up a little bit, but thinking about what can we honor, like, with our students. If we're looking at our growth, how can we kind of show their growth, and how can we kind of look at their growth, and how can the gradebook reflect that growth? Now, at the end of the day, you are in charge of your gradebook. So the way that we kind of do it, and how we kind of set up that, is totally up to you. I know there was some chat about like how our categories look like and how our weighting look like. And this ultimately is totally up to you on how you are setting those up. For practical reasons, I have to set deadlines when it comes to this. This semester I was a little bit more flexible. Usually I have, like, per quarter is like kind of hard deadlines, just to keep my own sanity. But I know, like, there's some other thought processes and other teachers that, will allow retakes if the student continues to work on it and continues to show growth even after the class has ended. They can go back and do the grade replacement. For my own sanity, that was a little too much. But we thinking about how you can set up those retakes, how you can set up those essay revisions, how you can set up project revisions. And one of the best things out of having this revision cycle is that students like kind of get mad at first when I'm like, there's no extra credit. And then I'm like, but you can redo any assignment. So you can go back and show me that work, or, you can go back and redo that assignment, because I want them to learn the skill. So if, however long it takes for them to learn that skill with it. Jen has a really great way where she has like waterfall grades when she like talks about like her essay process. And so it really is scaffolding the learning with students, but really like demonstrating this skill before you can move on to this skill and to move on to this skill. I'm not at that level yet. I like, for sanity, I like have all my students still like sort of in the same place, but that's just another way that we can kind of think about this too.
What she was talking about, and Amber, I said that after this slide, we could take a 5-minute break because it was requested. But I would say what Amber was talking about, so English teacher, you can't write your intro till you have your thesis. So some people are on thesis, and some people stay on thesis for like 2 weeks, and that's where they are. So in the grade book, they're on thesis. So other folks are on intro. Okay, if you've written your intro, you can write your body, you can move on. But then there's and with this digital platform, it's kind of, you can have people on different steps, and it kind of works. But I can't give you a 0 because you actually haven't done the previous thing. So my grade book sometimes looks like like a video game where I'm like trying to get those theses. So then I can try to get those intros. So then I can try to get those bodies. So it looks like I'm playing a video game in my grade book and of nagging children. But what else did I want to say about this is, oh, I have had my like you can revise things infinitely thing with honors classes and regulars classes for 5+ years. And I know people were like, but you're going to have so much work. And it's actually so much less. It's the thing earlier we said in our norms, try things on and take them off. That was something I tried on and it fit. I find it less work because there's also that relationship building thing. When you know I'm always on your team, I always think you can do it. I always think you can do it. I don't put up a wall because of a policy that's going to make things easier for me. No, not offense, but like the relationship, it kind of strengthens like, nope, you can still do it. You can still do it. You can still do it. It makes me unwaveringly available for them to succeed, or I'm unwaveringly supporting their like success without having a gatekeeper moment. Hopefully that sounded correct. We'll do 5 minutes. We'll stick around for people who want to just chitty chat in the chat. I'll put up a 5-minute timer. So if people need to get a coffee refill or anything like that.